This is a graph that, if you remember one graph from this course, is the one you ought to remember. And it's also exemplary of how a graph should be made, so I want to spend a moment talking about the graphical representation of data. On this graph, we have lines and colors and axes. The axes tell us what's being plotted. On the bottom axis, we have years before the present, going from 0 on the right all the way to 450,000 years ago on the left. On the left vertical axis, we have the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere in parts per million. That is, if I took a thimbleful of molecules out of the atmosphere and I separated them into the different kinds of molecules, if I had 1,000,000 molecules, this is how many carbon dioxides I'd find. On the right-hand vertical axis, there's a different scale. It's temperature, measured in degrees centigrade, running from -10 degrees centigrade or 20 degrees Fahrenheit up to +6 degrees centigrade. Then there's the legend of the graph. That is the thing that tells you what the colors mean. You see in the upper left, the blue lines represent the temperature in degrees centigrade compared to this baseline period of 1960 to 1990 is chosen in this case. Whereas in red, we have the atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration as derived from those little bubbles of ice in parts per million. So let's first look at the carbon dioxide. You see the red line starts at 280 parts per million, and then in sort of a wiggly fashion falls down to only 180 parts per million over nearly 100,000 years. And then in a relatively short period of time, a few tens of thousands of years, shoots back up again to 280 parts per million, and then starts its fall back to 180 parts per million. And then it does it again, and then it does it a third time. Every 100,000 years, the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere changes by a big factor, 50% or so, from 180 parts per million to 280 parts per million and back again. What's remarkable about this graph is how closely the blue line, which represents the temperature, follows the red line. It has exactly the same pattern. You see the blue line falling as the carbon dioxide falls, less carbon dioxide, less greenhouse gases, less of the Earth's energy is trapped, more of it is radiated into space, and the Earth's temperature falls. And it falls by about 8 degrees centigrade or 15 degrees Fahrenheit. It then rapidly rises again above the average, and then it starts to fall. And then it rises and falls and rises and falls, again on a 100,000-year timescale. Note that the last 10,000 years is the stablest period of climate that we've had in the last 500,000 years. And it's no accident that that's when civilization got started. Let's examine the most recent excursion of carbon dioxide and temperature that began 115,000 years ago. You see, that's when there was a plunge in temperature and a plunge in carbon dioxide down to the peak of the last ice age about 30 or 40,000 years ago. If we look back at our Earth's orbit changes, you remember the precession of the Earth like this was 115,000 years ago at a maximum, meaning the northern summer was when we were farthest from the sun. Furthermore, the tilt of the Earth's axis was at a minimum, and that means that the poles get less light than they would at other times in the cycle. And finally, the shape of the Earth's orbit was most squished, which means that being far from the sun in the summer really had a noticeable effect on a cooler summer. And so we see this fluctuation is tied very closely to the orbital changes in the Earth we talked about long ago. You see the 100,000-year period of the Earth's orbit going from being a circle to being squished to going back to being a circle again is what drives most of the pattern. But you can also see the 41,000-year cycles in the purple, which represent the tilt of the Earth's axis, decreasing and increasing. And you can see the 23,000-year precession of the cycle in the green arrows. Note that humans appear a few 100,000 years ago. Humans were clearly not responsible for this cycle back then. The last 10,000 years is the most stable period of climate we've had, and that's when our civilization has developed. But look where we are today. That's the current carbon dioxide level. It's higher, much higher, than it's been at any time in the last 5 million years. The question is, what does that predict for the future of our planet?